Hello, 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 everybody. Hopefully, everybody's having a good Saturday. Hello, 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 hello. And hold on. My bad, y'all. Because I'm doing all this by myself here. Um, because I'm doing all this by myself here, I'm doing all the setting up here. But good evening on this Saturday. Paul Greene-Dennis here, aka Deep Green, and again doing some live readings or whatnot. Think what I call truly edifying live nonfiction live reads of important stuff that they don't talk about. And yeah. So I'm gonna continue Margaret Kimberley's Prejudice, Black America and the Presidents. And I'm doing chapters 4 and 5. James Madison and James Monroe. And let's pick it right on up with James Monroe. Before I do, hide that. Chapter 4 of Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. Chapter 4, James Madison. James Madison's last will and testament states in part, I give and bequeath my ownership in the Negroes and the people of color held by me to my dear wife. But it is my desire that none of them should be sold without his or her consent or in case of their misbehavior, except that infant children may be sold with their parent who consents for them to be sold with him or her, and who consents to be sold. These weren't some of the infuriating degree of Madison's hypocrisy. He often called slavery an evil, and yet he participated in this evil throughout his life. For many years, he claimed that he would free the humans he owned after he died, but his final wishes proved that he had no intention of doing so. His wife, Dolly, was the daughter of a Quaker who had freed enslaved people in 1783. But after her husband died, she sold hers off. She sold hers to pay off debts. She did not follow the request in her husband's will that she asked their permission to sell them, as her cousin, Edward Coles, shared in a letter to his sister. The poor creatures would run to the house and protest against being sold and say their old master had said in his will that they were not to be sold but with their consent. She sold while I was with her a woman and 2 children to her nephew Ambrose Madison, who lives near her. The fuck? The woman protested against being sold, and the more so as her husband was not sold with her. Right. Like Thomas Jefferson, the slaveholding Madison claimed to think that the institution was wrong, but he never stopped profiting from it personally, and he made sure that his heirs did likewise. His contradiction in thinking slavery evil yet participating in it was resolved by his advocacy for colonization, the removal of black people from the land claimed by whites. In 1789, Madison wrote Memorandum on an African Colony for Freed Slaves. He called enslaved people unhappy, yet assumed that black people would exhibit vices whether enslaved or free. I wonder why they're fucking unhappy. Madison also gave credence to the justification of white prejudices against black people and concluded that the coast of Africa was the best place for what he called a benevolent experiment. 30 years later, Madison further developed his thinking on the subject and calculated the cost of compensating slaveholders at an estimated $600 million. All of Madison's calculations regarding colonization were a sham. Madison and the rest of the slaveholding class were not content to continue owning humans merely for their own comfort and profit. They wanted to expand this business as far as they could. Madison continued the work of his predecessor by grabbing more territory, claiming West Florida as an American territory in 1810 by arguing that it was meant to have been included as part of the Louisiana Purchase. And even those close to Madison apparently did not trust his pro-manumission rhetoric. Consider the case of Edward Coles. Ed Coles was Dolly Madison's cousin and served as a private secretary to Presidents Jefferson and Madison. Like the two presidents, he was a Virginia slaveholder, but unlike them, he had seriously considered giving his enslaved people their freedom. When Coles inherited 12 people after his father's death, he kept silent lest his plans be thwarted. 10 years later, when he informed his family of his plans, they convinced him not to tell his slaves for fear that they would talk and inform other slaves. It took another 10 years for Coles to take decisive action, moving with them to Illinois, where he assisted them in settling on land he had purchased. Coles did not tell his 6 adults and 11 children that they were to be freed until they had left Virginia. Near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, en route to Illinois, he told them they were free. They stared at me and at each other as if doubting the accuracy or reality of what they heard. Madison was a hard-ringing hypocrite on the subject of enslavement and any possibility of large-scale manumission. He became chairman of the American Colonization Society in 1833 at the age of 82. He spent the last years of his life claiming that he wanted to stop doing what he had done all his life, but his words were hollow, and he and his family continued their participation in the awful and peculiar institution. Done with that hypocrite. Now on to probably next hypocrite. Chapter 5, James Monroe. And this will end this section of the book, which is the Founding Fathers section of the book. James Monroe. James Monroe was the last of the Founding Fathers to be elected president. Like Washington, Jefferson, and Madison, he was a Virginian and a slaveholder, owning 75 persons. Monroe presided over further expansion of the country with the purchase of the remaining Florida territory from Spain and began the removal of American Indians in the Southeast. He played a role in many horrible events that resonate today. In 1817, President Monroe and his partner in crime, General Jackson, another scumbag, decided to kill two birds with one stone. They plotted to attack Seminole Indians in Florida territory who were aiding escaped slaves from Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. In doing so, they also established American designs on this Spanish territory. Jackson invaded Florida, captured a Spanish fort at St. Mark's, deposed the Spanish governor in Pensacola, and executed two British citizens accused of aiding the Spanish. The incursion created a stir in Washington, but Jackson was never punished. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams defended Jackson. The attack gave Adams the leverage he needed to force Spain to cede that territory to the United States. Monroe denied giving Jackson permission to invade Florida, but more significant now is that the role that historians play in covering up this and other crimes committed by U.S. presidents. Jackson made the case in a letter to Monroe that the invasion could be carried out without implicating the government. Instead of pointing out that Jackson was acting in accord with the interests and goals of the government, historians advance Monroe's implausible claim that he never saw the letter because Monroe didn't have a secretary at the time and was ill and didn't read the letter until a year later when Congress was investigating Jackson's actions. Like most white Americans of his day, Monroe was fearful of the presence of the minority black population who were free. He and other slaveholders, including Andrew Jackson and Francis Scott Key, established the Society of the Colonization of Free People of Color of America in 1816 with the goal of sending the free black population out of the country. It eventually became known as the American Colonization Society, ACS. A historical irony exists in the fact that Monroe's role in the founding of the ACS led to his name being forever linked to that of an African country. Liberia's capital, Monrovia, is named for a man who kept black people enslaved and wanted others to be shipped off so they wouldn't interfere with the justifications for human ownership. At the same time that Monroe was promoting settler colonialism, he also oversaw the expansion of slavery in the recently acquired territories. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 did two things. It admitted two states into the Union, Maine as a state that prohibited slavery and Missouri as one allowing it, and it limited slavery to those portions of the Louisiana Purchase below 3630 latitude, with the exception of Missouri. These machinations kept in place the precarious balance that allowed Northerners to think of themselves as enlightened and gave Southerners the incentive to ask for more. Monroe was infamous for many reasons. He was a slaveholder, accelerated the theft of indigenous lands to hasten the spread of slavery, and declared that all of the Western Hemisphere, North, Central, and South America, was the domain of the United States. The policy that became to be known as the Monroe Doctrine was buried in the annual message to Congress on December 2nd, 1823. The occasion has been judged proper for asserting, as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintain, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. In other words, any further efforts by Europe to colonize parts of the Americas would be treated as acts of aggression. The immediate target of the Monroe Doctrine was the Holy Alliance of monarchies in the post-Napoleonic era of Europe. Historians have characterized the policy as the world's only liberal democracy, the United States taking a stand against autocracy. Ain't that some hypocritical shit? But it must be remembered that at this time, free blacks did not enjoy equal rights and protections, and the millions of enslaved were regarded as property with no rights at all. Moreover, future American presidents will repeatedly cite the doctrine to support and justify U.S. aggression. The Eisenhower administration used it to justify a coup against the democratically elected government of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954. Ronald Reagan used it in an effort to subvert left-wing governments in Central America. In 2019, Donald Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, asserted in an interview that the U.S. would have the right to take action against leftist governments in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua simply because they are in the Western Hemisphere. In this administration, he said, "We're not afraid to use the word Monroe Doctrine." A legacy that ought to have been thoroughly discredited is instead used to commit aggressions nearly 200 years later. And that is the end of the chapter of the Founding Fathers portion of this book. I'm going to pick it back up on Tuesday with the pre-Civil War chapter portion of this book, with the next two presidents, John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. The genocidaire, Andrew Jackson. With that, enjoy your Saturday and stay cool and always stay learning. Deep Green out. I will continue to read for you guys. Enjoy your Saturday.